I had it in a stainless steel Yeti mug that our youngest son, Tate, had purchased me and gave me for me and gave it to me as a gift. Had it filled to the brim with Seattle's Best, black. I don't know what some of you guys, ladies, may put in your coffee. My wife, it looks like Georgia Creek water when she gets done, fluffing stuff. Powder, I don't know what all she puts in that thing, but maybe you do the same. But it was just a black cup of coffee, and I was really enjoying it. And boss man walks by, and he says, "Kev, this one looks like a good one for you. You know, it's Monday morning. A lot goes on the weekend, usually in police jurisdictions, and we have a stack of reports on Monday morning." And he handed me this one. He said, "I think you can, this one's yours." And I looked at it, and it's a burglary report, instant report. Burglary basically is where someone would enter your home, your house, this church building, without authority, with intent to commit a theft. And that's what this report was. I looked at it, and the officers had done a real good job. They'd filled in all the blanks, and they'd ask all the good questions. And I noticed that it was in one of our higher-end neighborhoods. And what had happened was, as I was sitting there sipping on my cup, I'd read the narrative, and the narrative said that this family of four, a mom and dad, had two teenage boys, young teens, 13, 14 years old. They'd gone on a trip to Florida. They'd been on vacation. Well, when they can't come home, as the dad pulled up and the mom was up in the front seat, and it was in one of our real nice high-dollar neighborhoods. This big, nice house. And it didn't have just a regular door entrance. I mean, it was one of these super wide jobs, and it had these colored glass down the side. And when the dad pulled up, he noticed that next to the doorknob, the glass was in this other part was broken out. Well, he did as any good as any one of us should do. He stopped and backed out of the driveway and parked across the street from a safe distance. And his wife called 911, and a couple of our patrol cars come over there, and they pulled in the driveway and got out, weapons drawn, went in and made entry just in case the bad guy or guys was still there, and they cleared the house. That's what we call it. No one was there. They come outside, they motion, mom and dad, they pull over and they go inside, and they do a quick inventory of everything that's been taken. Mom's jewelry had been taken. The boys' Xbox play games and all had been taken, and I think they was more upset over that than Mom was her jewelry. Dad had a jar of maybe a couple of $100 worth of coins. The house was in good order. You know, a lot of times you go to burglary and they just destroy the place. But other than that, it was in pretty good shape. Well, I got in my car and I just drove over there. Of course, the report had been taken on that Saturday when they returned. This is Monday morning, so I go over in the neighborhood and I'm riding through. And any good detective, any good officer will always look for what I like to call the Gladys Kravitz of the neighborhood. Now, some of you are laughing, you're smiling because you remember who this fictional character was on a television show back in the early 70s called Bewitched. See, Gladys Kravitz, nobody came around down her street, not a bird landed in Darren and Samantha Stevens' tree without Gladys knowing about it. And we love the Gladys Kravitz when it comes to nosy neighbors. We love nosy neighbors when it comes to stuff like this. And I pulled in one driveway not too far from the house. I seen a car out front, and as soon as I pulled in, I seen a head pop up in the window, and I thought, well, that's a pretty good sign. Well, I got out of the car and walked up, and she opened the door, and I gave her one of my cards and introduced myself and told her who I was with, the police department, and what I was doing there. And she said, and I explained to her what had happened, and she said, I knew it. She said, last Tuesday between 10 and 11 o'clock, she said, I was watching The Price is Right. I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, they was a green, about a 1989 Ford pickup truck. I said, slow down, Mrs. Kravitz. I got my pen out. And I said, you're my new best friend. And she went on to explain, and she said, it's not one of them long ones. She said, it's a short Ford. I said, yes, ma'am, that's a short bed. Boy, when I was writing that down, and she said, and he was a white man, and he was bushy-headed. I said, yes, ma'am. And I thought, boy, she's fixing to give me a tag number here in just a second. And she said, he wasn't back there 10 minutes, and here he comes. You see, the Gladys Kravitz of the world, they can have something, a washer and dryer going, and they can have the television going, and they can be on the telephone with another Gladys Kravitz across town, and they can see a truck go down the street. Don't you just love those kind of people? We do. Well, I went on and went back to the office. And I was curious. I said, Mrs. Kravitz, of course that wasn't her name. I said, most women don't, I said, even a lot of men, they don't know that it's an 89 Ford F-150. She said, well, my second husband, she said, he had a white one like that. And she said, he was a painter, but his was long, had a long truck, had them ladders banging on us. And she said, that's my second husband. And she said, I always bought our tags. And she said, I just remember it was an 89 Ford F-150. So I wrote all that down. I said, yes, ma'am, thank you, Mrs. Kravitz. And I went on my way. Went back to the office, still sipping on my coffee. Sat down at the computer. Back in the day, back 39, 40 years ago when I started, if you wanted to go to the pawn shop and see if anything had been pawned, you had to get in the car and drive down. Nowadays, it's right online. And to get a pawn license in town, they have to agree. The pawn dealer has to agree to enter all this stuff. So if you go in town, and probably that's the way it is around here, if you go to a pawn shop and pawn something, well, they take a picture of your driver's license, of you, and what's been taken, and they enter that information, and it's just right there at our fingertips. Well, I pulled it up, and get about 2 hours after 10 and 11 o'clock, there was PlayStation pawned. I thought, well, there it is. Women's jewelry, there it was. So I just get in the car and retrieve that stuff. And of course, I look at that and see the man, his address. I rode by his house. Guess what's sitting in his driveway? Green, 89 Ford F-150 pickup. Oh, by the way, it didn't have any hubcaps, and she told me that. I forgot to tell you that. No hubcaps. I thought, boy, I wrote that down. There it sits. I didn't knock on the door. I went back to the office. We have a way of looking up phone numbers. I just called. The lady at the home answered, told her who it was. Needed to talk to so-and-so. And she said, well, he's here. She said, you can just tell me. I said, no, ma'am, I can't do that. I said, can y'all come see me? Yeah, we'll be right there. Well, about 30 minutes, they showed up. He walked in, sat down, and the lady of the home stayed in our lobby. I sat down. I said, now listen. I said, are you so-and-so? He said, I am. I said, now listen. I said, before you say anything, I said, you got the right to remain silent. I said, anything you say is going to be used against you in court. And I said, you have the right to speak to an attorney before I ask you any questions. I said, if you can't afford one, I said, the courts will appoint you one where you can be represented. And I said, now, you understand your rights? He said, oh, yeah, I understand my rights. I said, you agree to talk with me? He said, I sure do. Of course, I was recording all this. And I said, well, sign right here. He signed right there. I told him about the report. I told him about Mrs. Kravitz, and he denied. I wasn't me. And then I showed him the pawn printouts on our colored printer and showed him all that. And look, he just dropped his head, sitting right across from my desk. And he's looking at the bottom of my desk where the carpet maybe meets the desk. And of course, I knew he did it, but I wanted to hear him say it. I said, did you do it? He said, I did it. I said, end of interview. I turned my tape recorder off. And somebody says, well, good job, Sutton. Good job. Really? Really? See, I was sitting there talking to this man. He's 17 years old. And somebody says, well, so? Brethren, let me tell you what I've been doing. This doesn't make me special. Since I was 19 years old, I've been asking a question. And maybe this comes from my upbringing. Maybe this comes from just like you, same background I've had, maybe raised in the church. I knew the answer to this question before I even asked it. Because in 40 years nearly, I've asked it maybe 1,000 times, and maybe really 1,000 times. 100 times 10, maybe 1,000, maybe more. He just dropped his head. I said, son, where's your daddy? I knew the answer. He said, I don't know. I said, how long has it been since you've seen him? Or how often do you see him? He said, once, twice a year. See, in the state of Georgia, if you're 17, you might as well be 59. Arkansas may be 18. Handcuffs, patrol car, go to jail, face in the newspaper, charged with a felony, and his future is basically scarred for the rest of his life, and he's 17 years old. And yes, he has to pay for the wrong that he's done. Don't misunderstand that. There is nothing else in America that we can do. But why is he there? Officer down the hall, I call him in, and I'm finally finishing off my coffee. Officer walks in, stands him up, cuffs him, leaves him out the door. Right through the lobby, Mama cries. She sees her baby put in the back seat of that patrol car, and away they go to the county jail. Handcuffs and all. She comes, "Can I speak to you?" "Yes, ma'am, come in." She said, "Where did I go wrong?" I said, "Ma'am, you probably didn't go wrong. We're miles ahead of her, aren't we?" I said, "How long has his daddy been gone?" She said, "He left right after he was born." She said, "I worked 2 jobs just to keep us fed and food over, the roof over our head." I said, "Good for you, ma'am." "Where did I go wrong?" I said, "Ma'am, you probably didn't." She shed a tear, and I did too. It's been said that the 3 sweetest words in the English language is home, heaven, and mother. I guess us dads don't even compete for that, and us granddads. You know, when poets and songwriters write about the sweetness of home, it seems that most of their thoughts turn to motherhood. And mothers, listen, grandmothers, you deserve all the credit you can get. I've known from a young man, the ladies are the backbone of the church. You know, my mother was a woman. My wife's a woman. God bless our mothers. God bless our mothers. You deserve all the praise that you can get. But what about us dads? Why is it that it seems like that when songwriters and poets write and sing about the sweetness of home, it seems like their thoughts turn to motherhood? Motherhood. And mothers, while you deserve all the credit you can get, I just wonder sometimes why so little praise is directed to the fathers. Why is that? Is it because we're less deserving, daddies? Or is it maybe because we're just not as prominent in the lives of our children sometimes? I think that may be more the case. Studies of male prisoners in America have shown that the number one most thing they have in common is a fatherless home. Number one. It's not race. It's not religion. The number one common denominator in 85 to 90% of the prisoners, the male men and young men that are locked up, fatherless homes. Over the years, occasionally, and inmates have a way of, they have a little budget. If they have family that comes in and gives them money and they put it on their account. Most jails and prisons do that. And they'll have family members to come by, but sometimes some don't. And we may have one out that's on a detail we call them runarounds. You may see it on TV, they call them trustees. We call them runarounds. We let them out during the day and they wash their cars, running around, cleaning their bathrooms, runarounds. We call them runarounds. And occasionally we get to know them a little bit. Maybe they've been on a runaround for 6 months. We see them every day. We know them on a first name basis sometimes. And around Mother's Day, sometimes they'll ask, can they borrow? If they don't have family that gives them money, they'll ask to borrow a couple of dollars. Why? Well, they want to buy they have a way of sending that money to get a Mother's Day card. You know how many times I've been asked in 39 years to borrow a couple of dollars to buy a Father's Day card? Can you say none? Why? They don't have one. And if this says anything to us daddies of the importance of being involved in the lives, daddies, listen, of our children, and understanding what a significant role that we play in the lives of our children, that we've got to take this responsibility serious. And I really believe, even in the church of our Lord, sometimes we don't do that, daddies. And I really believe, daddies, it's that simple. It's really can be more simpler than Satan would make it out it not to be, or to be. Daddies, listen, our children need our attention. And we need their attention, daddies. I said this morning after the Bible class that I wanted to speak for just a little while on the real threat. All that man can do that comes in that back door with a weapon, all he can do is take my life. That's all he can do. But what I do and what daddies do affects your children forever. Don't do that, Satan. Take me. Daddies, it doesn't matter if they're at school or at play or wherever it is. When they say, "Look, Daddy," we need to be there looking when we can. And mothers will say something about you in just a minute. And I know as our children grow and as they grow up, they'll have friendships in school, and they need to. They'll have who they call their best friends, and that's good. That's healthy. And they'll develop those friendships as when they get older, and they should. But daddies, listen, there's a period of time, especially in the early ages of their life, that just flees by, and it's gone. Fathers, I suggest that nobody on this earth should challenge the friendship that you should have with your children, even the mothers, in a special way. Now, I know the mothers are going to have their special bond, and I get that. But daddies, you're the captain. God has placed you at the head of the home. And our wives need to act that way and treat us that way. And husbands, we need to treat our wives like queens. There's a pecking order. We don't have time to go down that. I'm already pushing this. I'm always racing the clock, brethren. I'm always racing the clock. Wish we had time to talk more about that, but we don't. Daddies, I suggest the friendship between you and your children should have no rivals. God has placed us as captain of the ship, and I'm talking about godly captains. And when we do that, as I said, our wives need to step up and support that in our efforts to be a godly captain. Now let me give the disclaimers. There's a couple of them. Some children, no matter, because I've talked to parents, and there's no guarantees. You can be the most godly mom and godly dad, and sometimes children they get grown and they go their own way. And somebody may be thinking about Proverbs 22:6, where it says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he'll not depart from it." Brethren, that's a proverb. That's not 100% guarantee. You may not have failed if your children have gone astray. You may have been the best parents in this room if your children have got grown and gone astray. Because once they get to that age, they make their own decisions. That's a proverb. That's a proverb. And sometimes children I met a gospel preacher, this is the other disclaimer. I met a gospel preacher not too long ago. He said, "I had the sorriest daddy in the world." He said, "But me and Mama made it." I said, "Amen, brother." So just because a young man or a young lady doesn't have a godly parent, that's no excuse. If you have your Bibles, turn to Matthew chapter 17. I want us to look at a father. Matthew chapter 17. I want you to let us look at a story about a good father. Primarily, this story tells how Jesus miraculously heals a boy who suffers from epileptic-type seizures. But I want us to notice that behind the scenes of that story is a father who serves as a model for us today. This story is also found in Mark chapter 9 and Luke chapter 9 also about this father. Now listen, we don't know his name, we don't know where he came from or what he did for a living. And you know what? None of that really matters, or God would have told us. But what he does on this occasion sets him apart and deserves our attention and maybe even our imitation of this father. In Matthew chapter 17, go down to about verse 14. Verse 14. And when they had come to the multitude, a man came to him, Jesus, kneeling down to him and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is an epileptic and suffers severely, for he often falls into the fire and often in the water. So I brought him to your disciples, but they could not cure him. Then Jesus answered and said, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him here to me. And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. Point number one, very quickly. Point number one, the Father was there for His Son. Now, we don't know if He was always there for His Son because we only have this one isolated scene. But as this story indicates, that this young boy often had seizures, and often if he was close to the water, they had to watch him. He may fall in a lake, or if they was near a fire warming themselves, the boy would seize, and he may fall into the fire. And this happened often. So apparently the dad was there, and he had saw this. So he was a father who was present and involved in his son's life. And daddies, listen, isn't that the number one craving that our families have for us? It's us to just be available, be there for our families, to be present. That, listen, daddies, when we come home, listen, we're home. And we leave work at work. And we get off of that internet, and we get off of that couch, and we get into the lives of our children. Brother Sutton, what do you mean? Listen, that young man sitting in front of my desk, he had no daddy involved in his life. And brethren, I've met people in the church that daddies just work and work and work. I'm not talking about because he had to. Work and work. And their children, daddy's paying the gas bill, the water bill, and hauling off the trash and seeing that the grass is mowed, but that's it. And we wonder sometimes why we're losing so many of our young people in the Lord's body. We get off of that couch. We shut that internet off. We lay that phone down and we get into the lives of our children. Somebody says, Brother Sutton, why are you so passionate about this? Because I've been asking that question. And I even see it from time to time in the Lord's church. We don't even know our children. Daddies, mamas, what if I could tell you that there's a way that I could guarantee you that your children will be 5 times less likely to commit suicide? Would you be interested? I've worked those before. Teenage. And you can guess what question I ask. Every time it was the same answer. "32 times less likely to run away from home." Would you be interested, daddies? 20 times less likely to have behavioral disorders. 14 times less likely to commit rape. 9 times less likely to drop out of high school. 10 times less likely to use drugs. 9 times less likely to end up in prison. Do you want to know the guarantee to make these numbers go away? Be present in the home. That's it. That's it. That's it. The presence of good moms and good dads in the home, the daddies especially, makes a tremendous difference in the future of your children. Daddies, listen. Don't let your overworking schedule steal away your quality time with your family, and especially your children. Daddies, they'd rather live with you in a tent. They'd rather live in a tent with you than in a mansion without you. Dr. Paul Faulkner gave an illustration. He said that every once in a while in a game, basketball game, right at the end of the game, the score is real close, and from one end to the gymnasium to all the way to the other end, right at the buzzer, the ball goes in the air and it goes into the hoop. They win the game. How often does that happen? Rare. Extremely rare. It's so rare that a few times a year that ESPN will show that. It may have been 30 years ago. What about half court? How often does that happen? Not too often, but a little bit more. What if you're right under the goal? You can lay it in almost 100% of the time, can't we? Somebody here may can even slam dunk it. Daddies, that's the way it is with our kids. The closer you are to your children, and there may be some granddaddies here that's having to play daddy all over again, the closer you are to those young men and those young women, the easier it is for them to bond with you. You see, that young man had no one to bond with. And millions more just like him. They had no one to, they didn't have that male figure. Someone that they could go to. Someone that they knew that when their world was on fire, and all of that drama that comes into the teenage lives of our children sometimes, young men and young women, and when everything around them is collapsing, they know that you're there. They've got you, and they can make it with your help. The importance of just being there for their sons and their daughters. The most important predictor of criminal behavior, and I've already said it, it's not race, income, or religious affiliation. It's the father's absence. It's boys and girls that grew up without their fathers. So daddies, be there. Be involved. Well, Brother Sutton, what does that look like? Y'all just got to hang on. What does that look like, Brother Sutton? Daddies, how often do you talk to your children? I mean, really sit down and talk with them. Do you know their favorite color? Do you know what their favorite food is? Do you ever talk to them about God? Oh, we can talk to them about them Razorbacks, right? I don't know what noise y'all make, but go Dogs down around our place. We can talk to them about Georgia Bulldogs, and how about them Braves, not Tomahawk Chops? See, we can do that. But how often do we talk to them about God? Do we ever tell them that they've got a soul? And that one day their soul is either going to be at one place or the other. Do we ever do that, daddies? Brother Sutton, why are you so passionate? I'm going to tell you again. I'm sick of seeing it. In the world, yes, that bothers me. But it doesn't bother me near as much as when I see it in the church. And I know there's no finer people in this county than sitting right here. Maybe this lesson is just reinforces what you already know, and I hope so. But just in case it don't, then this lesson's for you. It's the real threat to our families. It's not a man with a gun. It's us. It's mamas and daddies that don't do it right, especially in the early years of their lives. Daddies, do you know their hobbies? Do you know their likes? Do you know their friends? You better know their friends, especially when they get up in the teenage years. They crawl in the car with that guy, and he's got a little rock to smoke, a little crack, a little meth. And all it takes is one time sometimes. You better police them. And I'm not talking about being paranoid and going overboard. I'm just talking about being in the zone with your kids, man. Knowing who they are. You can ask Jake and Tate. Jake's 33, Tate's 28. I remember one time, Jake, he's in middle school. He wanted to go spend out with his friends. Well, I played detective. I got in the car, me and Teresa. Jake was in the back seat. We rode down. Maybe Tate was with us. I'm sure he was. We rode down this part of the world where they lived, and I rode by. And I'm not saying you can always judge a book by its cover. You know, that lonely shack on the road, that lonely shack on the side of that country road can be the greatest home in the world, you know. But I pulled up in front of that house. He said, Daddy, he lives right there. I could hear the banjos playing. Deliverance. They was Pabst Blue Ribbon cans all up and down that driveway. I said, this ain't happening. I didn't want my son in that environment. Daddies, how much affection do you show your children? I hug and kiss my boys on the cheek. I don't care who's looking. I don't care where I'm at. They can take a picture, make it a 60 by 90 and put it on their living room wall. I don't care. Our daughters and our sons need to know we love them, Daddy. Matthew 19, beginning with verse 13, Jesus had children brought to him that he might lay his hands on them and pray for them. Daddies, how often do you just hold your children? You ever have prayer with them? You see, that young man never had anybody do that. That's the reason he's sitting across in front of my desk. Sometimes that's the reason we lose them in the church. Hold them. Pray for them. We talk about how Jesus blessed them. How did Jesus bless them? Well, it's in the verse. He touched them. He prayed for them. I read an article the other day that said research shows that the more you hug your children, the smarter they become. My boys are 26, well, I told you that. It's 28 and 33. Daddies, how much Bible reading do you do with your children? You ever sit down and just cut that television off, lay that phone down, and read the Bible to them? Daddies, do you pray with your children each night, every night that you can? Mamas and daddies, listen, you go in that room, you get on your knees beside that bed and you pray with your children or whatever posture you're going to use, and you thank God for them, and they hear you thank God for them, and you tell God how precious they are. Listen, they'll go to sleep 10 foot tall. And that puts armor on them that can shield most of Satan. And all of it, if it's taken right and properly, and you preach it and you teach it and you do that the whole life, it puts that shield there. It gets them where they need to be. Daddies, how faithful moms and dads in your attendance? Do you bring them to Bible school? Or do you just let that slide? What about Sunday night? Do you have them back here on Sunday night? Or do you just let that slide? Matthew 6:33, Hebrews 10:25. We don't have time to go there. The Bible still teaches Matthew 6:33 and Hebrews 10:25. What about Wednesday night? What about vacation Bible school? What about when you're on vacation? Daddies, do you show your family what's important? Mamas, we had one of our, he's about 10 years old, not too long ago at Adairsville. He told his Bible class teacher, he said, we don't go to church when we're on vacation. God forbid. Mamas and daddies, listen to me. You can be faithful as a clock, a Timex clock, watch, the whole year, and then go on vacation, and then just forsake God, forsake the kingdom. And I'm talking about where the church, it's within reasonable distance to meet at, and you just don't go. Don't you think your children know that? They see that. They remember that. Making sure that you're at all the service of the church. Daddies, do you support your children in certain sports? Some sports, the dress is immodest. Some sports at schools and colleges and all is sinful. Just simply by the clothing that they wear, or maybe I should say don't wear. Do we support them? Extracurricular activity? Do we go to their T-ball games? Do we go to their, oh, listen. Our children can be on the ball field, and if they know that we're there, listen, they may not be able to see you, but they can hear you. Attaboy. You know what that does for them? For that young man and that young lady? Listen, there's nobody else on this earth that can do that except you. You, Daddy, and mothers, but especially daddies. Daddies, you ever take your daughter on a date? She's getting that dating age. I remember when I began to date Teresa, she told me later she'd been ready for about an hour, but I had to come in. Ladies, young ladies, you make them boys come in. If that old boy ever pulls up in the car and blows his horn, don't you go running out that door. You make him come in and sit down and look at your daddy. And maybe, Daddy, you can be sitting there cleaning that double barrel, right? At the same time. And just let him hold it and look at it and say, now, son, is them barrels clean, or do I need to do some more cleaning? Ladies, let me throw this in. You make him open that door. Let's put him to the test. Don't you go running out that door and diving in. You make him work. Daddies, you take her on a date and show her that long before she gets there. You talk to her about how a godly man is supposed to treat her. And when you're treating your wife that way, if you are, they already know it. And if they get around that boy at school or something and they don't act like daddy, then ooh, that's bad. They can stay away from it. And mamas, the way you treat your husbands, your daughters, your sons, they see it. They see it. We teach them. I've got to bring this to a close. The other point that I was going to make, my second point, the father of our story was a good father because he came to Jesus for help. Notice the story begins by saying a man came to him, kneeling down and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son. What a father. The only time we meet this fella, he's on his knees in front of Jesus. You know, fathers, I suggest that if you haven't come to the Lord in behalf of yourself, can I say this and get away with it? Come to the Lord for the sake of your children. Now, that's faulty thinking, okay? Let me throw that in there. Or your grandchildren. Even if you don't think you need the Lord yourself, which is wrong, you do, you have a soul, at least realize that you're going to need the Lord's help in bringing up your children. As the father of the home, you're the moral leader of your family. And mothers, you play a huge part as well. We set the moral standards for our children, and it was true in Old Testament times. Even so much later on, even in early America, as rare as the divorce was, usually the fathers got the children. Why? Because back then they did most of the rearing. Isn't that different? It's always been that way. The other, and I'll close out, I'm winding this down. 85% of all to 90% of youth in prison comes from fatherless homes. And I've gone through some of these. 75% of children who are in drug abuse centers comes from fatherless homes. 71% of high schools, 75% in some locations comes from dropouts, comes from fatherless homes. Daughters without fathers are 711% more likely to become pregnant as a teenager. 90% of all runaway homeless children comes from fatherless home. 63% youth suicides comes from fatherless homes. Fathers, it's important that we be at home. Fatherless daughters, low self-esteem issues, struggle to build and maintain relationships, eating disorders, prone to depression, sexually active, susceptible to addiction. They have anger and frustration issues. The fear of being abandoned is what our daughters inherit. My point number 3 was, in this story that we've read in Matthew, he was a good father because he had tenderness and compassion. Did we notice his plea? He says, Lord, have mercy on my son. In Luke's account, Luke recorded, he said, I implore you. He was begging Jesus. You see, his heart was breaking. You know, sometimes we don't want to show emotions because we're men. But listen, Jesus wept. Jesus wept. It's okay to show emotion to our children. I wish we had time to go to Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 through 9, where we see a wonderful example of how of the examples that we can set in front of our children about how the Scripture there says that, you know, God's law was written on the doorpost. They seen it when they came in the door. It was talked about when they sat down, when they lied down, when they got up. It was talked about God's law, God and His love, and even when they left the house, it was on their mind, and it was even at the gate. Do we do that? Do we do that? Finally, the father of our story was a good father because of his faith in Jesus. In Mark's account, Jesus said to him, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. And in verse 24, the father cried out with tears. He said, Lord, I believe. He said, help my unbelief. You see, he believed Jesus had the power to heal his son. That's the reason he brought him to him. But he also knew that his faith could be stronger, so he asked for a greater faith. Daddies, how often, mamas, how often do we pray and ask for God for a greater faith? Daddies, we need to be the one. We need to be the faith leader in our families, and our wives need to step up and support that. if we're not already doing it. And I know maybe all are. So daddies, let me ask you, how's your family life? Daddies, how are you looking? Are you providing the leadership that God intended morally, emotionally, and spiritual? You know, we remember the story that, well, I don't have time to go there. Let me close by saying this. I watched him playing around my door, my neighbor's little boy of 4. I wondered why a child would choose to wear his dad's old worn-out shoes. I saw him try with all of his might to make the laces snug and tight. I smiled to see him walk, and then he'd only step right out again. I heard him say, his voice so glad, I want to be just like my dad. I hoped his steps would choose safe for his son to wear his shoes. And then a shout and a cry for joy, a hello, Dad, and a hiya, boy. They walked along in measured stride, each face aglow with love and pride. What have you done today, my lad? I tried to wear your old shoes, Dad. They're big, but when I am a man, I'll wear your shoes, I know I can. They stopped and stood there hand in hand. He saw his son's tracks in the sand. His word of prayer comes back to me, Lord, let my steps lead him to Thee. And I think that's an appropriate prayer for all of our fathers today and our mothers. I wish I had more time to talk to mothers. That our steps will lead our sons and our daughters to Christ. But it doesn't happen by accident. We've got to be good fathers and good mothers, and we've got, brethren, listen, we've got to lead them. We got to lead them the way that we want them to go. Fathers, how are you? Are you at home? Are you somewhere else? And when they say, look, Daddy, are you looking? I hope you are. If you're a member of the Lord's body and you have sin in your life, the Lord's invitation, not mine, hey, I'm just a nobody wanting to tell everybody there's somebody that can save anybody. That's my bio. But if you're a Christian and there's something in a public way that's between you and God, the Lord's invitation is planned at this moment that you can take care of that. And the good brethren here will pray for you, and you can leave this place on your back on the road to heaven. Or maybe you're not a Christian and you want to know more about how to become a Christian. Just step out into that aisle, walk down this front pew, and I know there's brethren here that will study with you and show you what God says to become a Christian and live faithful for the rest of your life. If you're subject to the Lord's invitation, come now as we stand and as we sing.
Where my heart is